Let's look at the row. Now we're going to look at two versions, the standing bent over row with dumbbells and the seated row with resistance bands. These can be done at the gym or home and can be done independently of one another or used in succession, as I'll explain in a moment. The row is a pulling movement and works primarily the muscles of the back of the torso and front of arms. Specifically in the back, it targets the latissimus dorsi or lats, the rhomboids, and trapezius or traps that provide support to the shoulders and neck. It also works the biceps and elbow flexion, and of course your forearm muscles. To maintain the angle of your position, the bent over row will also work the musculature of your hip and low back. It's because of this I want you to be very clear on what you need to do to protect your back. In general, and regardless of the exercise, you always want to maintain the curvature of your spine. Let me show you a quick everyday example on what it means to maintain the lumbar curve of your back. You've often heard when lifting something you should use your legs, not your back, right? Watch what happens when Brian picks up a pair of sunglasses without thinking about it, just by bending over. See right here how his back has become rounded? This is what we want to avoid. It places additional stress on the low back. Alternatively, you can see Brian perform a golfer's lift. Golfers frequently do this when they pick up a golf ball and tee. See how his right leg kicks out? This helps a bit in preventing the back from rounding. The gold standard, however, is to squat down and to maintain a lumbar curve of the spine with a flat back. This is what is meant by lifting with your legs. So in general, in exercise, you want to maintain a flat back and avoid rounding of the spine. Now with this knowledge, let's look at the specific setup of the standing bent over row with dumbbells. You want to be standing with your feet about shoulder width apart. You should bend your knees slightly and then bend over or hinge at the hips so your upper body approaches a parallel orientation with the floor, while of course maintaining your lumbar curve and a flat back. Before you begin your first repetition, make sure you are in a stable position, and then slowly bring your elbows back until the dumbbells reach your lower chest and abdominal area. Notice the shoulders are down and the head is in a neutral position. Keep your center of gravity over your feet and lower the weight in a controlled fashion. If at any point of your set you feel your back fatiguing, go ahead and shut down the exercise. If you find the bent over row too troublesome, you might prefer to do a seated row with resistance bands or do the seated row after performing a bent over row to get a deeper fatigue of the targeted musculature. To set up the seated row, sit on the floor with your legs extended or slightly bent knees and wrap the bands securely around the arches of your feet. Sit upright with your chest up and slowly pull the bands back with a parallel grip until they reach your abdominal area, drawing your shoulder blades back. Return your hands short of the starting position to maintain some tension in the bands and repeat until thorough muscle fatigue. Okay, let's return to the bent over row as Brian gets started. We can see Brian here slowly moving into a stable position. His lumbar curve is maintained, his back is flat, and he's ready to begin. He slowly brings his elbows back, the dumbbells brought to the midsection, and then he begins the lowering negative phase, keeping his center of gravity over his feet. As always, Brian knows the main objective is to fatigue the musculature, but in this case, he must do it while also maintaining a stable posture. Maintaining your posture should be top of mind throughout this exercise. Now, Brian's doing controlled repetitions, aiming for about 10 seconds per rep. He's also keeping his head in a neutral position, and as the exercise gets harder here, he is maintaining constant airflow. You don't want to hold your breath or grunt as it gets harder. Focus on shorter, shallow breaths with a relaxed face. Let's listen to his breathing here. Now you can see Brian really starting to fatigue here. This is where you really have to be careful with the back. And he pulls until he finally shuts it down once positive movement has stopped. So that was a good set, but if he would have only done a partial set or he wanted to do a little more, he can add a seated row with resistance bands, and we'll join him here with just a couple of reps remaining. Brian is finishing the rep. Notice how he doesn't fully extend his arms. He wants to keep some tension in the bands, and as he brings his hands back, retracting his shoulder blades, keeping everything nice and solid with his posture. Again, he doesn't fully extend, and you can see through his efforts with the shaking, short, shallow breaths, and he reaches the point where he is done. Now the final thing to do is just document your performance. Make sure you note the weight used or the type of resistance bands used and your time under load until positive movement stopped. Okay, we can now move on to the next exercise.